today we're talking about building a sphere of influence, sort of the anti-networking approach, okay? Because I think when we hear the words networking, there's a lot of assumptions, and maybe even like negative feelings around it, right? And I think that our takeaways today are sort of threefold. One, we want to talk about how to build a powerful sphere of influence and relationship currency in an authentic way. And believe it or not, it is possible to do this in a very organic and authentic way. It's not about, glad handing. And then also talking about, first of all, how are we defining influence, and then finding our own unique influence path. So based on our own superpowers and gifts and passions, how are we going to influence and inspire others? And what legacy are we going to leave in the world? And how are we going to prepare ourselves to embrace that path if we're not already doing it? And then also really building your own influence brand, right? So again, a lot of us think there's some assumptions, which I'll share with you here, around both networking and influence that I think get in our own way. Like networking is really only something you need to do when you need something, right? The most common thing would be when I need a job. So I meet a lot of really talented executives that say, my network was overseas, or I've been traveling, or I've been heads down, and I've neglected my network. And really what Patrice and I talk about is how your networking is your full-time job. Your job is what you do in between, right? So it's sort of a different way of thinking about it. And you just have to do it right and authentically and in a really time-conscious way so that you don't give up or burn out. Also, there's a trend, especially amongst introverts, that good networkers, they're usually really self-serving and disingenuous. I hear like used car salesmen, nothing against used car salesmen. I say it just to emphasize my point, but, you have to be really sleazy. You have to force yourself into conversations. You have to take control of the room. That's the only way to do it well. Another myth would be, I just don't have enough time, right? Or it's not producing enough ROI for the time that I'm spending. And so that means we're just doing it wrong. We're not doing it well. It doesn't mean that networking doesn't work. Right? There's a lot of people that when I used to coach people in transition, and now Patrice does a beautiful job with that, with her own program. But when I used to coach people in transition, they would argue with me and say, yeah, I've been to FEI, I've been to ACG, like it's not working. Well, we're going to talk about how to do it in a way that produces tremendous ROI and that is in alignment with who you are authentically, right? And then also that a lot of people believe just the simple act of getting meetings is networking. Like, I went to this meeting, I attended this, I collected these business cards. Like that should be it. That's networking and nothing's happening from it. So that's like the basic level 1 of networking, right? And now it's how do we maximize those opportunities, those events that everybody gets invited to, and turn them into something really powerful and ongoing, right? So networking is not about activity. In fact, sometimes the best networkers are the ones that actually have fewer meetings. They've just gotten to a place where they can turn those meetings into 10 other meetings with people that matter. So that's the key. It's not about volume. And then very quickly, influence assumptions and myths. A lot of people only think about influencing for today. Like I need to influence my team to follow. I need to influence my boss to allow me to create followership and make an impact and progress in my career. So I think a lot of us think too short term, or we keep it too close. Like really, we need to be thinking about 2 jobs out. We need to be thinking about what stories people are telling about us in the market today, not just within our own organizations, right? So I think, again, there's a lot of assumptions around that my stakeholders, it's my boss or it's title driven. My stakeholder is the CEO or it's my direct boss. And yes, that is a stakeholder, but there's probably 10 others that are impacting your career as much or more, some of which you might not even know, right? So it's about identifying those stakeholders and proactively managing them. And then the other most common myth or assumption is, and I was a victim of this earlier in my career, my performance should speak for me. It should create my brand. It should help me get promoted and open doors, right? Like that should be enough. And counterintuitively, performance is usually third on the top 3 most important things that lead to sort of a successful career. So we'll talk about the concept of PI, performance, image, and exposure.
What's happening in 2021 going forward is a massive amount of churn. Ladders did a survey of 50,000 executives. We're talking director to above level. And 67% of them said, I am planning on quitting or changing my job this year in 2021 coming right up. So there's a massive amount of churn that has kind of been unprecedented. And part of the reason why they needed to do this, these executives felt that they needed to make that change, is because they're not able to get to the pay raises that they want to get to. And this speaks to what Kristen's talking about, who you have to influence and why you're influencing them, and how your boss does and doesn't play into this, and beyond your boss and who else around them. So if you want to get a pay increase, if you are making that transition, you're able to get to a 10 to 15% pay increase. Someone that I just worked with literally tripled their salary because of the negotiating strategies that we worked through, the process that we walked them through. And I can't tell you, she's super over the top excited about her new role that she just landed. She landed that role in less than a week of having finished the program that we provide. So great, I love those kind of days when the days start like that. It's over the top awesome. It's also been taking most executives longer in 2020, as we all might imagine. It usually takes on average about 6 months, and as long as 12 months to make transitions if you're kind of doing it on your own. And especially if you're in a passive transition, easily 12 months. But when you're in an active transition, oftentimes it's about an average of 6, and it kind of bumped up to closer to 9. Again, one of the reasons that I launched the program that I put into place and launched this app after having been a serial entrepreneur, I had my 3rd successful exit in 2016. And then 2019 came along and I'm like, I've got to go do something more fun. And what we decided to do was launch a platform that includes an app that helps you to do the things that we're going to be talking about today, to be consistent about your networking, to get reminder notifications to tell you, hey, Heidi, it's time to reach out to Stacy. Click here to email, click to call, click to LinkedIn, click to WhatsApp if you deal with the international community. So we designed it specifically with that in mind. And then for those people who need a little extra help, like you're not sure, you're here today because you're unsure of how do I do these things? Like, I get it, I get the reminders, but am I doing it well? Am I doing it efficiently? To Kristen's point, she said, it's not, it's difficult to get results when you go to ACG. You show up, you're doing the stuff, but you're not getting any traction. So that's why we put the accelerator program and educational piece in here. And then we also offered the one-on-one coaching. We added that to it. And then we provide concierge services for those of you who are working your 40 to 60-hour weeks and you don't have time to rebuild your personal brand, redo your materials and messaging, and come away with meetings every week that Kristen's talking about. Like, you should have those meetings every week, at least 1 or 2, that you're talking to the people that are influential in your spheres of influence. And so we're going to talk today, and Kristen's going to lead us in this discussion about how do we have those really effective conversations. So take it away, Kristen. Let's dig in.
All right. So I'm Kristen Kenton. I run a firm called Kenton Talent Management. Basically, what I love to do is help organizations hire for who. Generally, that's the transformational leaders that usually grow it, fix it, or exit an organization, right? And then the other business that I run is the Executive Women Summit, which is an organization where we do quarterly gatherings that are really provocative and somewhat controversial. We're talking about stuff that really matters as it relates to like leadership, transformational business trends, and just as being human beings, right? Behavioral economics and influence and followership. So if you haven't attended, we're having a co-ed gathering on July 27th. First, I think it's important to define influence, right? And it's not about getting people to do what we want them to do, right? I think there's 2 different definitions. I like the one on the right a little bit better, honestly, but one is the capacity to be a compelling force and produce effects on the actions, behaviors, opinions, and or beliefs of others, okay? So this one sort of implies that we're forcing or pushing versus a pull. So I want you to notice the difference with this next one. So the other definition that I like better is the capacity to have an effect on the character, development, or behavior of others, right? So it's my capacity to have that on you based on what I know you need from me, not what I want from you, right? And that is also the fundamental piece of networking. So it's about how can I arm myself to give so that you will be always thinking about, God, this person has helped me so much. How can I help them? Right? So the act of meeting isn't enough. You've got to be arming yourself with questions that we're going to talk about to give them things that are really meaningful to them so that they want to give back, right? So it's about giving more than receiving. Receiving should happen if it's the right person and you're doing it in the right way. If it's not, cut bait, right? All right, so why is networking even important? Like a lot of times people will go into conversations around networking and just assume that everybody believes that it is important. And what I have come to realize when people are honest with me is a lot of people actually don't think it's important, especially if they don't need something like a job. So here's why I think it's important. One, whether you're employed or unemployed, you will have access to the best resources, vendors, advisors, coaches, people that can influence your life, which helps you influence others, right? It'll open new relationships. For me, new relationships really mean learning, right? I get to see more perspectives. One of the fundamental reasons that we end up disqualifying candidates after interviews is, I think they just lack perspective, right? Especially as it relates to like my industry or my company, talking more from a client standpoint, right? So the more relationships we have and the more stories that we listen to, the more perspectives that we gain. You become an asset to those around you, right? Again, whether you're employed or unemployed, if you do this in a very intentional way, if you network in an intentional way, in the right way, I'm one call away, always, from whatever answer I need, from whatever resource I need, right? If any of you need a banking relationship in Singapore, I'm one call away from being able to give you a good referral to that, right? Because of how I've invested in my network. Also, it's given freedom and flexibility, right? So one of the reasons that I do what I do is, one, I love it. And I was lucky to find what I love really early. I started doing this when I was 18 years old. But I realized this role, this job, my network allowed me to be self-employed. So I can make the kind of living I want to make, and I can be a present mother. I can be a present wife. I can pick my own hours. Now, Patrice will tell you, sometimes I work 16-hour days and there's like sprints and it's awful, but at least I get to choose, right? Like if I actually want to go to the library and read for an hour, I get to do that. And honestly, I don't think I would have been able to do that if I didn't have the network that I did in Denver, right? Because I wouldn't have clients or candidates. So it just creates the bigger your network and the more powerful your network, the more you get to choose, the more you're in control of your career path. And whether you have to take that job or whether you have to stay in that job, right? It helps you become unstuck. And then also, if you do this right, and I know this is a big statement, but you'll never have to look for a job ever again. So this is something where if you're touching the right people and telling the right stories and influencing people in the right way, you should be getting job offers when you have that dream job, right? So truly, if you invest the right time and you do it the right way, you should never have to look for a job again. Any questions? Anything else? A value, something that's important about networking that I'm missing?
What do you guys get from your networking? When you go and you have an awesome networking experience, what do you come away with?
Well, I found that it helps me find mentoring relationships. So maybe that's in the new relationship area, but I find people to mentor and then people that can help me along the way.
Mm-hmm. Confidence, I think, is another thing too, right?
Yep.
I remember when I just got back home to Denver in 2008, worst possible timing to start your own firm, right? I remember I would use a tidbit of information from my meeting at 8 a.m. in my meeting at 9:30 a.m. And it made me sound like, oh, she knows what's happening in Denver. When really I just learned that tidbit an hour and a half ago. but
I think the learning.
confidence.
I like the
Yeah,
learning.
exactly. The learning, the confidence. Like, I think sometimes we're afraid to say, oh, I don't know what that term means, or I don't have the answer to that. I've had so many conversations. If it's the first time that I've heard something, it's probably okay to say, I don't know what that means. Can you explain it to me? Right. So it gave me a lot of confidence in just myself, and my stories and my knowledge. And so anybody else have thoughts, ROI? Okay.
Yeah, hi, this is Ellen. Sorry I was late. I'm a part of the Kit List. Some of you may be familiar with that, with Sue Connolly. And she's a dear friend, and it just always reminds me, because the philosophy and ethos of the Kit List in networking is serve others first. And by doing that, like in your networking, seek to be of value first. So I would actually reorder your slide because I think it's like third or fourth. Because when people feel like you're just being generous, like it inspires generosity as well. And you don't just do it so that you get in return. It's just, that's attractive.
Right.
That makes, yeah.
It's like contagious. Yeah, we actually covered it in sort of the last slide, but that's the whole foundation of this. Is I think a lot of people go into every conversation to thinking, what can that person do for me? And really, you have to have a real fundamental shift in beliefs, which is hard. But it really should be, how am I going to make this person successful? So that's a really good point, Ellen. Thank you. All right. So the dreaded elevator speech. Okay. I think the elevator speech is a really good construct. And I don't love it when people practice and they write down their elevator speech and then they don't use it. Like, you should be using it in informal and formal discussions. But an elevator speech, essentially, back in the day, used to be how you talk about yourself and the story that you tell about yourself in the amount of time that it takes to get from the top floor of a high rise to the lobby, right? So it should be about 60 seconds in length. And in my opinion, I think that this is the ideal construct of an elevator speech. It's 3 sentences. It's how do you categorize yourself? Because we've all gotten those calls at 7 p.m. and somebody's like, hey, Kristen, how are you doing? And if I don't know who that person is, my walls go up. Like, I'm already like, who's calling me at dinner time? What do they want from me? What are they selling? So categorizing, it's human nature to want to categorize others. So categorize yourself. What is your function, your industry, the size and scope of your career, right? Also, remember, there's a rule of 3 with this. You can't say, oh, I'm a finance executive, operationally oriented finance leader with experience in real estate, construction, healthcare, nonprofit, fintech, education. Like, people will just start glazing over. So there's a rule of 3. And if you're going to say operationally oriented and results driven, which again, that's kind of fluffy, but you don't get more than 3 adjectives. You don't get more than 3 industries. You don't get more. So rule of 3 in the introduction phase, right? So that's your first sentence. Sentence 2 is the most important piece of the elevator speech. This is how people are going to remember you. This is your value prop. This is what you do best in the world. This is your secret power, right? And your value statement might change depending upon your audience. I have a different value statement when I'm talking to HR leaders than when I'm talking to CEOs, than when I'm talking to business owner operators, right? So I usually have 4 to 6, right? So for me, one of the things I talk about is I help organizations hire transformational leaders that help them fix it, grow it, exit, right? It's a rule of 3, it's short and sweet. Now you'll remember, oh, she's sort of the small through middle market, fix it, exit, grow it, private equity, M&A, a lot of change and growth. It's like a quick value prop that helps people remember you, right? And then sentence 3 is a call to action. And I like, on the side here, we have some tips. Be self-aware and self-reflective. I think the most powerful call to action statements start with, as I think about where I've had the most fun or probably made the biggest impact in my career, it's with private equity firms, business owner operators that really want to hire for who, or it's middle market companies that are growing exponentially and they need leadership help, right? So it's something around like a self-reflection. It's something very genuine. It's not, I'm hoping to meet as many private equity guys that you can introduce me to, so I hope you'll keep me in mind. It's, as I think about where I've had the most fun and where I make the most impact, it's with these relationships. And then what I usually say is, and I'm happy if you'd share the same with me, I'm happy to keep you in mind as I continue to bolster my network, right? Like, who would you like to know and why, right? So I think these are the tips around an elevator speech. The more self-aware and self-reflective you can be by even including statements like, as I think about and what I've come to learn about myself and one of my core philosophies is, or what I'm most passionate about is, those are the ones that are most memorable to me, right? Because they sound so real and honest, like people have actually put thought into it, right? Avoid fluffy subjective language. Now, some people can get away with this verbally because of the way they deliver it so powerfully. Like, I am fiercely committed to continuous learning. I have an insatiable curiosity. That's all fluffy stuff that most people would say they have, but it sounds that the way you deliver it, if it's very authentic, you can get away with it. In written form, I would avoid fluffy subjective language as much as possible. So if you have strategic or results oriented on your resume, I would ditch them. There's probably not an executive resume that doesn't have one of those two words on it. And then keep it under a minute and then practice with a partner, right? Or I practiced in the mirror when I was thinking about mine when I came to Denver, right? I'd practice to see, do I look real? Am I keeping it short? Does it seem genuine? Is it really speaking to what I want to say and how I want to be remembered, right? Any questions about sort of the elevator speech? Because I think good networking starts with, how am I going to introduce myself to the world? You have to prepare for this versus just kind of winging it in the meeting.
I have, well, kind of a question and kind of a comment. Sorry, I have these dogs that were going crazy, so my camera has to go on and off.
Sure.
But I think one of the things that's hard for me with this is, I feel like sometimes you're put on the spot, like even with this self-introduction thing that we did earlier, and I feel like I flub it. So I'm just wondering if it's like, how do you, collect your thoughts and take that beat without feeling, with it still feeling authentic and not feeling like you're saying a line that you memorized? You know what I mean? Like, how does it feel natural without you sounding awkward and not practice,
Well, being prepared, and Patrice, I want you to answer this too, but I think that, being prepared doesn't mean you have to sound scripted. Like, the way that I delivered my elevator speech, I'm hoping it didn't sound scripted. It is, right? Like, I think about value statements and stuff, and that's where I think the self-reflective language, it makes it sound like you're just thinking of it versus this is something that you've said a million times. So I think the more prepared you are, the more you're going to be more articulate about how you tell your story and what you talk about. A lot of people, they'll try to wing it, and then they'll say things, they'll emphasize things that aren't even important. Or God forbid, they'll talk about what they are doing versus what they want. Like, I hear this a lot. Like, I've spent 15 to 20 years in oil and gas, but I don't want to be in oil and gas. Like, why are we even talking? Like now I'm like, as an end user, I guess I'd be like, well, wait, all of a sudden I was going in this direction and thinking about all the oil and gas people I know. And now you said not to do that. It's about being impeccable with your word, right? So the more you practice this counterintuitively, the less scripted and the more articulate it's going to be, right? I think that's why I say practice in the mirror or practice with a friend, because it's the scripted part that you want to get rid of. Patrice, do you have thoughts, or does anybody have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I want to say, Heidi, first of all, everybody feels that angst when they're going to introduce themselves. And you only reduce that angst really by practicing. Mm-hmm. And even when you haven't done it in like a month, you suddenly start to get rusty, even though you've done it before many, many times. So it's about consistently practicing. And that's one of the reasons that we pulled the group together with our executives to give everybody that opportunity within our cohorts and things to practice that. But also, to your point about what exactly to say and how to get it to be authentic, it very much does help to have somebody else give you the feedback to what you're trying to say, and help you understand, what am I hearing when you say that? Yes. That piece we found very, very helpful. It goes along with the whole other aspect around telling your stories beyond just the introduction, like getting into the rest of the stories, and the importance of getting feedback on that so that other people that really, how are your words resonating? So you're hitting on some really important points, and kudos for sharing and being a little bit vulnerable about admitting, yeah, that's really freaking uncomfortable. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's really a gift. I mean, how often do we have, it's like, we do this in the Women's Summit University program too. It's called the fly on the wall, where people talk about you like you're not in the room. And at first, the first time I did this exercise, I was so self-conscious. I thought, what are people going to say? And I was blown away. I still get emotional by like how kind people were. Like in my own head, the way that I thought I was coming across and how I flubbed it and how I wasn't articulate, that's not what people were seeing at all. So to have a cohort where people that you trust, and also cross-functional folks, like there'd be a CFO, there's a CEO, there's an IT leader, there's a sales leader, they'll go say, this is what I heard when you said those words. That's the kind of feedback that is such a gift. Like people don't usually do that. Even when you ask for real feedback, people usually flower it up. But in a cohort like Patrice runs, you'll actually get that real feedback. Like I remember there's this brilliant CFO that he had his script down. Like he had practiced and really was just almost neurotic about the words that he was using and the way he was emphasizing the words. And then somebody said, look, I think you're overthinking this. Like you're over explaining something and it's losing the impact. Like, why are you explaining this piece? Leave it out. And he was like, oh God, leave it out. What if there's a job that comes up that's so important to that one thing? The reality is that doesn't happen. Like if you pigeonhole yourself and you say, I'm the best sustainability, communications and marketing professional in the world, it doesn't mean people aren't going to call you for roles, marketing and communications roles that don't have to do with sustainability, believe it or not. Right. So anyway, any questions about this?
Thank you.
Yeah. And use it, right? Like really use this. Like it's, again, people write this down and spend a time with it. And then they'll go to a networking event or they'll go to a dinner and somebody will say, what do you do? And then they just don't even use it. They'll just, I was going with the flow and it felt better. It's like, no, that's what it's for, right? Both formal and informal and verbal and written. So.
I love that specific example of leaving it out, because
Yeah.
I feel the same way. Like, what if I don't bring that one career path up?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody will think of me for that.
Exactly.
That's
like
okay.
on a resume too. That's why we have such a hard time keeping it to like 2 pages, or it's like 9 font. That's my favorite. It's like margin to margin 9 font, because we wouldn't want to leave one bullet off that might be the thing, right? The reality is, it's just, I mean, think about it. Have you guys as leaders ever hired somebody for a 1-sentence thing in a resume? Or was it because of the way they were introduced to you, the way you experienced them in a meeting, like all that kind of stuff, right? So, all right. So how do we do this authentically? So now we know this is how we prepare for just general networking, right? And it should be what we use in our email messages to people, and it should be in your summary of your resume is your elevator speech. Like it's not a different thing. Like all of this stuff should go together. But how do we do this in a meaningful and real way? And who was it? Cody, I think you said something at the beginning. You and Stacy just really focused exclusively on career or like company stuff, because that's the mindset we're in. That is really common, right? So creating two-way value through what I call the 4 C's. Actually, this isn't my thing. It's a Chris Pelly thing, who's a very, 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 very good networker in town. But he said, these are the components of our life, of a human being, right? And most of us play always in this area here, especially in work situations, in the career section, right? But there's other C's. So we've got career or company. We've got children, and that can include fur babies, because a lot of people aren't having children anymore, or, their fur babies are their children, right? Charity would be another one that, especially in Colorado, I mean, we have per capita some of the, highest nonprofit organization rates. That's not how I'm trying to say that, but you know what I'm saying? We have a lot of nonprofits in Denver.
There's the most nonprofits in Colorado than any other state.
Right. I think it was DC that was maybe the exception. But anyway, there's a lot of nonprofits here. And so it's funny, when I moved back home to Denver from California, it was a very different talk track. Like in California, you spent 90% of your time here in career and company. Charity or community and church, it was more about the boards you're sitting on for this purpose here, this career purpose here. When I got to Colorado, it was like all these other 3 things before we even talked about business, which was so refreshing. Like, I swear 80% of the population here either skis, bikes, or hikes. Like, you talk about that, you're probably satisfying about 80% of the population, right? So I think what I'm trying to emphasize is we need to start moving away from like transactional, uninspired sort of conversations, right? To be memorable, we have to be vulnerable. We have to ask questions that maybe nobody else has asked, right? And this is a little bit of a risk. You have to read your audience here, but career is just one level. Then there's children, then there's charity. And then I said community. Like, if you feel like it's a safe space with church, like, the context and all of that, you can go there. I mean, again, they get riskier and riskier as you go down, but especially in a first meeting. But I would try to ask questions that help arm you to give that individual what they need as it relates to all 4 C's. Okay. So then the question becomes, how do I arm myself, right? So let's break this down into sections. So let's just start with career, which is the easiest one. So most of us ask, what do you do? That's a really easy, common, everybody asks that question. How about how and why do you do what you do, right? Mm-hmm. Or why do you do what you do? How do you do it differently? Like, I know somebody at XYZ competitor. I'm really curious to know what you do differently, the way you deliver your service, the way your product differs, right? Like, what's different, how and why versus what, okay? Where are you currently investing most of your mental energy? Like, this is another way of saying what's keeping you up at night. That used to be a cool question. Now everybody's asking it, but basically it's like, when you think about where you're spending most of your mental energy right now in your life, where is it? And I'm always surprised how infrequently people talk about business when I ask that question. It's really cool. Like, most people talk about, oh, I'm getting my master's, or I'm homeschooling my children. That's another reason women were exiting the workforce. It was crazy because they're at home, homeschooling was going on, and they felt somebody needed to homeschool the children. But anyway, it's just interesting. The more open-ended you are with these questions and the more unique they are, you'll be able to see like what they value, what they care about, what they talk about and don't talk about, right? Describing your ideal client, this is really arming you, because as you network elsewhere, what I like to do is keep like keywords in my CRM, where it'd be like, oh, this person says they really want to meet private equity professionals. So, and I'll put PE. And anytime I'll meet a PE person, if it makes sense, I'll say, oh, Bob, PE person, meet each other. And then I'll use your elevator speech to introduce you, right? So it helps me be more proactive about my gives for that person. And also, you don't want to waste a give that is actually a get. Like, you think you're helping somebody, but they're actually helping you. They don't look at it as I'm getting something. They're actually like doing you a favor. That's the worst kind of thing that can happen. Like, you're assuming that they would want to know somebody that maybe that won't lead to business, right? So these are the kinds of questions that help you be a better sort of networking partner and keep it more genuine. Who are your best referral partners? Where did you get most of your business last year? When should I think of you? Is always a good one. Like, I'm out there. Some of you that are in transition are in this unique situation where you have the opportunity to spend 100% of your time building your sphere of influence. How cool is that? Like, that is a gift to other people. Like, if I'm too busy to network, quote unquote, like a lot of people think they are, then I can at least now know Stacy's out there networking and meeting tons of people. Now he can help me because I'm being delinquent in my networking, right? That's a gift that you can give somebody. All right. So anyway, I don't have to read all of these, but children, what do you do when you're not working? I mean, you have to kind of look for these nuances in the conversation. If they say, oh, I'm late, I was driving my kid to soccer. That's not a throwaway opportunity, right? It's a good opportunity to say, oh, my kids are in soccer, if that's true. Or, oh, my kids play competitive, whatever. They're competitive dancers. All right. Tell me about the most important relationships in your life. What causes are you passionate about? What boards are you on? How are you giving back in the community? How important is community to you? What are your guiding values and principles when you hire talent? When you're selecting business partners and advisors, do you have a personal advisory board? You know, where are you hanging out? Sometimes people laugh when I ask that question, but I really want to know, like, well, where I hang out is I hang out with other soccer moms, or I'm really passionate about sustainability, so I'm on these 3 boards. And these are the things that we have to start asking to get away from the transactional conversation. Any questions or other questions?
We're missing the college piece.
You say that every time. I've got to remember to.
Oftentimes, it's probably like 30% of the time, people will be able to relate to one another through that whole college connection. Like, what university did you go to?
Yeah.
Or you know somebody who did, or you ended up having it, or your school is a rival to theirs. Like, there's like a lot of conversation that gets generated around that.
Yeah.
Immediate in kind of club thing.
Yeah. In Colorado, if you went to DU, it's like way better than if you went to Harvard or Yale.
I agree.
Yeah.
There is that. Yeah.
So any questions about, have any of you asked questions that you've realized, like, wow, that was really impactful, that I've been getting good results from this?
A big thing is, what's a substantial thing you learned this week? Because that usually informs where they're focusing in life.
Yeah, that's a safer question, but it's meaningful too.
Yeah.
Like, it's not leading like church or, yeah, I like that a lot. Significant learning, or best book would be in the same vein. Best podcast, whatever.
Yeah, I'm curious if people are able to collect up this kinds of information, and if they are doing that. Are any of you guys doing that kind of stuff? Do you just have it? How do you even keep track? I'm dying to know that.
Keep track as in cataloging basically the metadata on the individuals.
Yeah, like
answers.
Had a conversation, like Kristen mentioned, she keeps track of her conversations, and she takes the time to put it someplace in some kind of a database of some sort. Maybe it's even an Excel sheet or something, but I'm curious if people keep track of this, if they do track it, if they find it useful, or just it isn't necessary.
Patrice, I generally I generally keep track of people's private information, you know, family and what turns them on, what are they doing. I do that in contacts, but as far as normal communications like emails and staying in touch type of stuff, historically I've used HubSpot.
Oh yeah.
And HubSpot also allows you to make your own sales funnel. So I made a sales funnel for networking and interviewing, and I try to put a lot of people in the front end, and then they move across the sales funnel. Every once in a while, by the time you get to the other end, you got something good going.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, this is a sales and marketing process. You're just the product when you're in transition, right? If you guys have any other questions to add, feel free to chat, right? Like, really good, compelling questions that have worked for you. I love the learning question.
You know, the question that I don't really like receiving is, hey, what book have you read lately? Because that makes me feel bad that I don't have time to read the hot books right now.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
And I'm like, I do know how to read. I'm just not doing it right now. So,
right. Yeah. You know, not all of these questions are going to land with everybody. Like, there are some people, you have to read the room. Like, I remember I met this guy from Deloitte, and we were similar in age, and he was probably passive at best looking, but I remember he stopped the conversation at one point and goes, I feel like I'm being interrogated. Which I've learned about I am actually a fiercely curious person. Like, I really am geeked out by human behavior and behavioral economics, and like how our backgrounds impact our career paths and our futures. And I will just go on and on asking questions, and some people look at that as a little intrusive, or like it's none of your business. So you have to sort of read your audience in terms of how deep you go here. But, you know, I do think that generally we play it too safe. not me, but most people generally play it too safe in terms of like keeping the questions a little bit more sterile, a little bit more safe, a little bit more like common. And I think if you just deviated 2 or 3 degrees, what would that look like is the real question, right? Okay, so now it's, what do I have to give, right? Because I remember there's a lot of people that said, like, I've been heads down, like, what am I going to give somebody? Like, what do I have to give them? And so we talk about it in the context of the 3 I's, right? So first thing would be information, like articles, podcasts, news. Like you can do Google alerts and stay on top of like interesting things. Like you can put companies, like if there's I really want to work for Boeing, you could put Boeing and people on the move, or Boeing PR, right? And you'll always be able to get articles. And I mean, sharing articles and podcasts is a better way to stay in touch than just checking in, if they relate to the questioning, the way that you've armed yourself. You don't want to be that person that's sharing a bunch of information that the person's just deleting. It's like, why does this person keep emailing me and I'm just getting all this junk? Like, you don't want to be, that's worse than doing nothing. So you have to make sure that you're aligning the 3 I's to the information you gathered about the 4 C's, right? So invitations would be another one, right? Like, the other thing is they should be more exclusive or special than like invitations that everybody gets. Like everybody can go to ACG, right? So inviting, I mean, unless it's a good friend that you want to just bring with you, that's fine. But if you're going to invite a CEO somewhere, it should be something like, oh, we're organizing an exclusive after hours party after the Capital Conference, or, oh, we have a group of private equity people coming into town, and, you know, something that's more relating to what they need, something that's more exclusive. And then the easiest, in my opinion, would be introductions, right? So if I'm doing a good job, and Patrice's app helps you do this, but if I'm doing a good job tracking who I've met and some of the key information around the 4 C's, like I know this is the people they want to meet, this is what they're passionate about, this is what's keeping them up at night, I will be able to, every single time I meet somebody new, filter through who I've met in the last 30 days and then provide introductions for anybody that makes sense. And I do that at the end of every month. I usually make about 6 to 8 introductions at the end of every month based on the new people that I met that month. Any questions? Does anybody have an idea around, here's something that was really, I've gotten a lot of responses, or I sent this information and people were really excited. Like any thoughts or advice that we have for your peers?
I think that covered it pretty well.
Okay.
I think so.
So one of the things that a lot of times, so I don't know if you've heard of the behavioral interview or like STAR behavioral interviewing. It's a pretty foundational sort of classic interview method that focuses on a specific construct. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, result, as you can see on the slide here. Now, STAR stories don't have to just be for interviews. Certainly, if you're interviewing and you're in transition, you should be practicing STAR stories as it relates to all the most important categories, whether it's you as a leader, whether it's your function, whether it's your industry, right? Like for me, it would be, give me the STAR story for hiring for who, or values-based interviewing STAR story. Let's say it would be a STAR story around how I leverage technology or a bucket of tools to develop filters. Like these are common questions that clients ask. How do you develop your spreadsheet of candidates? I have to have a STAR story for that. And then tell me about when a search doesn't go well. If you've ever had to refill, I have to have a STAR story for that. So as an individual, I want to think of multidimensionally here. What are the most important categories or buckets in my life and career? And do I have a compelling STAR story to share in my, like, pull it out of my pocket at a networking event, in an interview, even just with my own boss? If I'm gainfully employed and your boss comes to you and says, I'm really worried that we're not building a talent bench and we need to be hiring the future tech leaders of tomorrow, and you know, it's competitive and nobody can hire these people. We have to have a STAR story that helps that person, that stakeholder feel comfortable that we're prepared to do that, right? So this isn't just for when you're interviewing. So let's talk about sort of an example here, right? This is in the context of an interview, these notes, but so situation, basically situation just means, and then a lot of people just skip this part and go right into the activities, and it's hard to listen when somebody's saying, oh, I'll tell you about a project I led, was a, $3 million project, and this is what we were doing. I'm trying to think, where are you? Like, what context? Where are you in your career? Where are you? What company? What title? Are you leading a group? Are you a member of a group? So situation just sort of frames out the landscape, right? It's like, here's what's going on. When I was the VP of operations at XYZ company, I was charged with reducing turnover, right? So then it would be task. What is the task? That is what the problem is, the hurdle you're overcoming, right? So we need to frame that in a way that, we were losing good tech talent. We weren't able to compete from a financial standpoint. So I needed to reinvent a way that we were attracting, assessing, and retaining tech talent, right? So that's the task that you're charged with, and like what role you're going to play in it. Are you the leader? Are you an individual contributor, right? Are you a peer? So that's task. And then action. What specific action did I take? And you can get a little granular here, right? Like it should include like, these are the people I worked with, so I worked with IT, finance, engineering, and production to develop a new 3-phase plan for attracting tech talent, right? And then maybe, a sentence around what that looks like. And then the biggest piece that people don't talk about is, what was the result? What was the outcome? How did it impact the business? How did it impact you? What did you learn, right? I think a lot of people just talk about the actions, and they don't talk about then how that led to success, your learning, the financial health of the business, the culture integrity, the values health, all that kind of stuff, right? So does anybody want to share, put them on the spot, a star story that relates to any kind of dimension of your background? Any brave soul?
Sure.
Ooh, who's that?
Pete.
Nice. All right, give it to us.
Okay, so I was tasked with developing a financial model to run the strategic planning for Oracle's hardware division, which was about $4 billion in revenue, spanning the globe. And so it was going to require to build a comprehensive financial model to look at product P&Ls, to show contribution margin percents across the business. And once we initially designed it, we found out that most of the products were hitting single-digit margins, which was unacceptable. And so we stepped back and we re-looked at the KPIs we were using to kind of design and structure the business. We came up with some new organizational design, as well as eliminated the products that we were having poor margins on. We ended up saving the company $700 million annually.
Wow. Wow, nice.
And became the
Wow.
best practice for strategic planning within the company.
So it's sort of the pilot that then was rolled out enterprise-wide as like the best practice for how you categorize product margins, what KPIs you measure, things like that.
How you build and develop the financial forecast for the business.
That's cool. Yeah. I mean, obviously I think it needs a little editing around just sort of shortening and condensing and like tweaking, but that was perfect. I mean, I could have used a little bit better tee up on situation. You circled back. You were tasked with this at Oracle, and then the size and scope. I think maybe it could have been, and again, people have assumptions about this. It could have been better to say, when I was at Oracle, we were tasked with this, it was a $4 billion business. And what was the problem? We were, in the single digit margins on
We
product.
needed to redesign the business so we could transition from hardware to cloud.
Perfect. I like that better. So when I was at this level and this title at Oracle, that was the task. We needed to transition from hardware to cloud. And then the action you took should be probably 1 or 2 sentences. I think it was more like 4. And the result was amazing, really hard hitting. That's a huge impact. Anybody else have feedback? Thank you, Pete. That was really brave and very good.
No, I really like the results that were in there. And that's often, as you mentioned at the front end, Kristen, the hardest thing for people to really nail is metrics-based results. Most people are really comfortable saying something more fluffy like, we saved the company a lot of money. You know? Great, how much?
Or we really improve morale.
Right, we really improve morale.
I mean,
People
that's
really love
fine,
it.
but how does morale then impact EBITDA, right? I mean, as much as you can try to do that, I think it's helpful. It doesn't have to be every story that it's like a financial outcome or like that you're tracking in percentages. But I think in general, what I look for is how much perspective did this person have as it relates to like the landscape? What was their stakeholder influence? What was their thought process or their methodology for solving a problem? And then did result or impact even matter to them? Like if they don't even mention it, it's like this person's probably not super results oriented if they're not talking about how it resulted, like how it impacted the business, what the result was, right? So I think it's a lot of, from an interviewer standpoint, how you think and organize information is really important. So that was a really good example. And I would encourage all of you to practice. Again, think of like the 3 to 5 biggest dimensions or categories within your business, within you as a leader. There should be a soft component around people. There should be a technology component. There should be a financial component. There should be a whatever, right? As it relates to your space, and practice star stories. Even if you are not interviewing, like these are the kinds of stories that help you build influence when you're networking. The stories are the best language for like networking, not statements or even questions, stories. That's what makes people so memorable. Like there's a lot of people that will just read off a list of their credentials and their accomplishments. But when I hear a story, I'll remember now. Like for instance, when I met Heidi. Is that Heidi? Yes, Heidi. Okay, yeah, sorry. I had a brain moment. When I met Heidi, the thing that was most interesting to me was her story around Costa Rica. And like she lit up when she talked about sustainability and like how that changed her life, like that kind of travel and spending time in another country. If she just said, this is what I do, and this is my title, and these are my industries, would it be memorable? Probably not. But I will remember Heidi now, right? As being really passionate about sustainability and the story that she told around Costa Rica. Stories are how you build influence in networking. All right, any questions?
I have a quick one. It might end up being a topic for another time, but what if the story that you have, it shows you coming out, you know, like a star, but it's based on the fact that you had terrible leadership? Like you
had horrible bosses, or you're a horrible leader?
Yeah. Because often I've had to leave companies because of horrible bosses, but you want to spin it in a way that's like, it was still great.
So I find, and Patrice, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, but anytime, you have to be careful. I think sometimes people are actually too sensitive about being negative or disparaging. Like I actually would rather know, I don't want you to go from fire to fire, from pan to fire, frying pan to fire, right? Like I would rather you speak openly about, there's a way to put a spin on it where it's a little bit more positive. Like for instance, what I've really learned throughout my career is I really like working for leaders that allow us to throw crazy ideas up, to get on the whiteboard and brainstorm, right? Those are the kind of bosses that I thrive in, those kinds of environments. You don't have to say, I don't thrive, or I'm really stifled in the opposite. Like they'll know what you're saying, right? When you spin it that way. The other thing is, if you frame anything with learning, you can get away with almost anything. So when I talk to people about weaknesses, it's like one of the most common interview questions. It's like, tell me about your weaknesses. Tell me about your development opportunities. I hate that even more. But it's like, you got to talk about it. And you don't want to sound like that, you know, oh, I'm a perfectionist. And then maybe I'm impatient, and maybe I'm a workaholic. That's what everybody says. I would rather hear a real thing, right? For me, one thing that I learned is I actually was too black and white in my early leadership. For me, it was all about results. It didn't matter if like your grandma died, there was a crash on the way to work, you either were on time or you weren't on time, right? And what I learned about myself is I became a much kinder and more effective leader, and frankly, a happier person when I was able to see the gray, right? It's one of the biggest learnings of my leadership career. So one, I think you can get away with saying something like that, or even like one of the things I learned from working for a person that frankly wasn't a great boss. He was a phenomenal salesperson. He had a photographic memory. Like there were so many great things. One thing I admired about him is he knew he wasn't a great boss. He actually hired a phenomenal coach that changed my life, right? So I think if you're talking about sort of self-reflection and learning lessons, you can actually be a little more honest about bad bosses, your own failures or missteps or shortcomings. As long as you're learning and you're self-reflective, that's the key. Anybody else have feedback?
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you want to keep it to the positive and avoid the negatives, regardless of the situation in which you're sharing it with other people, because in the back of their mind, they will wonder, is she going to say something like that about me?
Exactly. That's what I've always been afraid to do that.
Right. So to Kristen's point, you just have to think about and practice and relearn the art of speaking to the positive of it. So, bookends of your comments, like if you want to put something negative, put it in the middle, where as she shared that great example of, that boss, he was great at sales. He wasn't very good at leading me, but then when he hired somebody else to help us in between, it worked out really, really well. So I've bookended, positive to couch the negative in the middle. That's another good way to think of it. Little tricks for your brain, because we want to talk about that darn negative thing. What didn't go well. Our natural tendency is to say what didn't go well. Like we go there. It's the easy thing, but just putting some positive framing to it's super important especially when you're meeting new people. If we're talking about networking, you want them to think of you as a person who is introspective and thoughtful and who would be kind to them eventually too.
So in terms of taking action, what would I do if I'm either in passive or active transition and I want to increase my network in a real meaningful way, and I want to be more influential, not just to the present, but as it relates to my career plan? My pseudo retirement plan would be I'm cherry picking board level searches or C-suite searches that are with really, culturally healthy organizations. Maybe I'm doing some coaching or mentoring. Maybe the Women's Summit University has taken off in a new way, right? So I've got to think about that is now the rope across this fast moving river that is life. You don't just jump into the river. You might come up on the other side a mile down the road in a dead patch of grass. If we have a rope and we follow the rope, it makes things just a lot more, it makes all the little decisions in life a lot easier, right? So if a client tries to recruit me and says, would you take a more comfortable role and get this corporate salary and benefits, and you can run executive recruiting at this big company, is that progressing towards my ultimate vision of doing board search and doing leadership development for women? And no. So it's an easy no. Now, I don't even have to think about it. I don't have to think if that's my plan B if this fails, right? It's not leading me to my passion, to the rope. So here's the actions that I would take. I would actually create and memorize and practice an elevator speech. I would ensure that all of your self-marketing materials, digitally and in print and verbally, share the same themes and value props and passions. You have to be known for something. You have to really embrace one thing, right? Not be all things to all people. And I could do banking, I could do real estate, I could do med tech. Nobody calls those people. We have to be focused on oh, that's the person you call when you need a transformational leader in banking, or that's the person you call that's a sales and marketing guru in healthcare and med tech, right? Then you meet new people. Now, you might have to have a practice period if you're not really good at networking. If you know that you're intensely nervous, I'll admit something to you that is embarrassing to admit. I'm a nervous flyer. Academically, I know it's a safe way to travel. It's a little neurotic thing that I have. I hate getting on airplanes, and takeoff is if I could, I'd be screaming, praying, screaming. I think when I was little, I said, the plane's going down. I'm screaming it. The only thing that helped was flying more often. There's nothing else. I tried hypnotism. I'm even embarrassed to say this. I tried being hypnotized. I tried having like this written plan of all the things that I was going to do to practice. People would say, you can't worry about things you can't control. I have no idea how to do that. I'm not even going to try not to do that right now. That maybe is coming in a later point in my life. I don't know. But we have to have, we have to practice. So if you know that you're not a comfortable networker, you've got to do it more often. Go to the ACG meeting, go to the FEI meetings. Then when you get into a place where you really do feel comfortable and your elevator speech is down and you're connecting people with people in an authentic way, level up your networking. Stop going to the rubber chicken circuit. Now go to the exclusive host your own gathering. Say, I want to host a gathering for people that are transformational leaders. I don't care if they're CIOs, CFOs, sales leaders. I'm inviting them to my house for dinner. I'm going to have a dinner. You know, this is the kind of stuff you have to think about, always leveling up your game with sort of networking and how authentic and influential it is. And then practice your star stories. Think about all the multidimensional stories, practice telling them, get feedback from people and say, rip this apart, please poke holes in this, make this thing Swiss cheese. Make a list of people that you want to know as it relates to your influence path, right? So for me, if I know what I want to do in my pseudo retirement, who are the people I need to know now and start building relationships with today so that I can retire in 20 years. That's literally what we should be thinking about, is like the best influencers are doing it today, right? Nurture your network and find ways to stay in touch that don't take a lot of time. And that's the 3 I's, right? Like, okay, I know this person really, maybe this is somebody that's considering adoption in Russia. I know another person that's just been through an adoption of a Russian baby. I'm going to connect those 2 people, right? So at the end of every month or the end of every week or 2 weeks, whatever cadence, think about what are 3 introductions that I can make that are meaningful, that are gives, not gets, that are gives for them, not gets for me. And then create and nurture an advisory board, right? So this would be sort of the 3rd level or the next level of networking is I'm not just going to ACG and now I'm not just going to the select stuff or hosting things. I'm actually creating my personal advisory board. And for me, if based on my vision, it should be somebody that does board search today. That's like the board search guru. It should be the best leadership development, emotional intelligence expert, right? That I know. And it should be people that are not like me, that don't think like me, people that are maybe more left-brained, right? That will ask the deep questions and say, before you act, Kristen, what could we be missing? How can I unpack that with you? Like, I'm going to be really selective about who I ask to be on my advisory board. Any questions?
What a great advertisement for what we do. I couldn't have asked for a better thing. That's like all the aspects of that is what we touch on throughout the whole Career Connects model. That's exactly why we built it. So those of you who look at this list and go, oh my God, that's a daunting list, and where do I begin? Yeah, come and check us out. Career Connects will help you get there.
Yeah, it's sort of a no-brainer. If you can say, if the questions you're saying is, do I have at least 5 to 7 people in each of the influence paths? Like if I'm a finance person, I should know 5 to 7 CPAs. I should know 5 to 7 bankers. I should know 5 M&A attorneys, right? If the answer is no, I think Patrice's program is just a no-brainer. I mean, it's something that will continue to serve you throughout your life.
Yeah,
and hopefully you never have to do it again.
You know, and especially we've launched our latest piece of the whole program, which is around the Career Connects Alliance for Executive Alliance, which is that long-term networking group of, and you know, little small group interactions, having accountability partners similar to what Kristen's talking about, like an advisory board. It's the same kinds of concepts, getting people on board with you who are there to, you support them and they're supporting you. It's not even a one way, it's just really 2 ways of helping you along this journey.